It's that time of year again. You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This is my 10-week group coaching program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the first week of October. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 432. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I teach women's health professionals how to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practices, and I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health, because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with me today. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode in my Fertility Awareness reality series. I'm sharing an interview with my client, Maria. And one of the topics that we dive into in today's episode is charting your cycles when they are irregular. And so certainly one of the biggest myths around fertility awareness cycle charting is that in order for it to work, you have to have this perfectly regular, predictable cycle. And that certainly plays into what I would call rhythm method thinking that if your cycle isn't, quote, predictable, it won't work. Because with fertility awareness, we're not actually trying to predict the cycle. We are learning to chart the cycle, understand the cycle in real time, and identify in real time which days of your cycle are fertile or infertile in order to either prevent pregnancy if you are using the method for birth control, or achieve pregnancy if you're trying to conceive. And so in today's episode, we get into a little bit of that and also talk about, although you can still chart your cycle successfully and use the method accurately and to a high degree of efficacy, some of the challenges that are associated with charting through irregular cycles. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Maria. And I'm excited to be here today with Maria. Maria is a member of my current Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group program. And at the time we're recording this, I think we're just a little bit past halfway through. So we've been together for a little over a month now, had many, many sessions already. And I think at this point, we just finished the birth control kind of unit, if you will, in the program. So thanks for coming on the show, Maria.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. We had some tech difficulties, which was really interesting, but you were super patient and we were able to overcome them. So I'm actually really excited that we're making this happen.
Yeah, me too.
Well, so to get everything started, I would love just to ask you a little bit about, what brought you to fertility awareness. So maybe let us know how old you were when you had your first period, if you have a birth control history, and what made you kind of decide to move to fertility awareness at this stage.
So I had my very first period in middle school, so 6th or 7th grade, and then I didn't have another period again until I was 17 in 11th grade. And that's when I had more regular periods. And then in terms of birth control, I only use abstinence. I've never used hormonal birth control except for, I think, early in my 20s. I had to go on one cycle of progesterone because I had a period that wouldn't stop. And then other than that, I haven't used any type of birth control other than abstinence. And then I came to fertility awareness because I'm getting married, and one of the requirements to get married in my church is to take a class on natural family planning. So I originally went to a Billings method instructor, didn't ever really feel confident in using that method and didn't really feel comfortable learning with the instructor just because I guess, our communication styles didn't match well. And then I stumbled upon your podcast when I was trying to better understand cervical mucus. And then that's when I signed up for the class.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, no, thank you. I feel like the class ended up being very timely because your wedding is right around the corner. And I've had quite a few, I would say over the years, I've had quite a few women who take the class in a similar situation to you, who are planning to get married and are wanting to, jump in and learn about fertility awareness at the start of that, often to avoid pregnancy for a time. And so you're in good company there. With your experience, I think if anyone has listened to the podcast for a while, most women do have a pill history. So it's a little bit more these days on the rare side to have not. So there's definitely still a percentage of women who've never used it, but it's just not as common these days. But I think it's really nice sometimes to have that kind of like story showcased on the podcast to say like, yeah, there's still women out there who've never, for one reason or another, just haven't had, used it yet. So in your case, our main focus, kind of the primary focus, has been on birth control. And then, of course, it always comes up that we're looking at cycle health and things like that, but we're kind of juggling those two primary factors. And also, I mean, I'll just put this out there and ask, because I know a lot of the listeners, this is one of their challenges, but obviously, in order to make this work, your partner has to be on board. So I'm sure that you and your partner have had conversations about fertility awareness and using it as a birth control. So is there anything you'd want to share with the listeners of how your partner has been with this process and what it's been like learning alongside him, and has he been supportive and all that good stuff?
Oh, my fiance has been very supportive. With our Billings method instructor, she had us both go, and she explained fertility to us both, what it means for him, what it means for me. And then whenever I learn, Bill doesn't sit with me during class, mostly because it happens while I'm at work anyway, but the videos that are part of the course, I've had him watch them with me, so he understands what I'm doing and what I'm looking for. And of course, when you have two people who aren't sexually active with each other talking about this method, it can be kind of awkward, but that's just part of transitioning to that different stage of life where you are thinking about having children. So it is important for him to understand, this is why if we want to not have children, we have to limit having sex to these certain times of the month and not have sex on other times of the month. So I think it has definitely brought us closer together because we are having this type of conversation with each other and, learning a new skill.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's, I think especially for women who have never really had to have those conversations, if they're on hormonal birth control or have otherwise used a method that didn't really require the communication, like it was just kind of taken care of, I think that it can be really intimidating. I think a lot of women might be afraid, like, is he going to be open to it and whatever? And I think we can really get in our heads about it. But I always like to share those kinds of stories because my experience has been, I've been personally using the method for a long time, as you know, and I've worked with hundreds of women at this point who have used the method. And I really haven't come across, obviously your partner kind of has to be on board to use the method. So there's that. So, if that's not an option, they're not going to be in my class. But at the end of the day, though, from what I've seen, the majority of men do seem to be pretty supportive because they want you to be happy.
Yeah.
They want you to be healthy. They love you. And if this is making you happier, or especially for women who've had bad side effects and stuff like that. So for anyone out there who's a little bit nervous, I can't guarantee your partner is going to be thrilled and over the moon about it. But overall, I've seen, I haven't really encountered this really negative experience from men around this method. I've actually encountered the exact opposite. So just for reassurance for anyone out there. Well, let's jump into it then. Let's jump into the session part. So you did send me some charts. We've had a couple of sessions together already. And I think in our first hot seat session, our primary thing was we're looking at some of the overall lifestyle stuff, but we were also kind of looking at some of the differences between the Billings method that you had used previously and the Justice method and kind of getting used to everything. So let me know where you'd like to start. I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you. Let me just see. so we can see the same thing. But while I'm doing that, let me know what you'd like to focus on today, what questions that you had, all that good stuff.
So looking at my first chart, I'd just love to know if because when we first had my hot seat, I thought I had ovulated, and then you thought that, no, it doesn't look like you ovulated yet. And then 1 or 2 days later, then I saw the cervical mucus, and then I saw the temperature rise. So just trying to see if my understanding of when the fertile window opened is correct.
Okay.
And I have my chart open on my iPad if you just want to tell me what day we're looking at.
Okay. Well, yeah. So because of our tech difficulties, I would have to shut down the thing to open it. So I'm looking at your chart from May to June.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if I remember correctly, when we had our session, I don't remember exactly when we had our session, but I remember looking at your temperatures and not being convinced that
so
ovulation had happened.
Our session would have been day 29 on the 31st.
That's right. And so for the listeners, I mean, basically what we see on the chart by day 29, which of course, as many of you know, that's around the length of a average cycle kind of thing. So you would expect to have ovulation by then, like emotionally. But what we saw was several dry days and then some days of, I don't remember if we spoke about this, but I would put these days here. So cycle day 15 through to cycle day 23. So those are the days that you actually marked with the non-peak mucus stamp. So like the lotiony, based on what you actually wrote down. So you wrote down smooth sensation, and on the toilet paper is either shiny or a little damp. I mean, we could talk about it, but I would mark those as green dots.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So you would mark it as a green dot instead of light purple because
of how you marked it. So I'll just clarify with you how you marked it. So the way you marked it when you were wiping, it was a smooth sensation. And based on the notations that you put down on the toilet paper, you would have seen either like a damp or a wet or a shiny, but you didn't note that there was any actual mucus that you could pick up.
Yeah, so I wasn't actually able to pick up any mucus.
Yeah, so because you weren't able to pick it up, we would put that into the dry category.
Oh, I see now. Okay, so learning the color coding is, it's new. So basically, if you see something on the toilet paper, but you can't pick it up, it's green.
Well, yeah, unless it's lubricative, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless it's lubricative. Yeah. The lubricative and the dry no cervical mucus is really clear to me. It's the when to put the light purple versus the green that I haven't been able to wrap my head around. But yeah, now that makes sense that you've explained it to me.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, so we're just getting obviously into the nitty gritty of some of the Justice notations here, but basically to put it in layman's terms for the listeners, I mean, basically we have dry days and we have mucus days. And so with this standardized way of charting, we're identifying which is which. So that's basically what Marie and I are doing. And so under the dry category, basically we put a line in the sand. So dry days, essentially with this method, are days when you wipe with the toilet paper. So for newer listeners, there's different ways to check for mucus. And when I'm teaching my clients, I'm teaching them the wiping method. So another common method is the internal check, but right now we're talking about the wiping method. So you're wiping, and sometimes it can feel dry. Sometimes it can actually feel smooth. So basically what you experienced, though, was a point of change in the sense that it was dry. There was nothing for about, was this like 7 days? I don't think I did my math right. 8 days. So you had dry after your period stopped. You had dry for 8 days, and there was nothing at all. And then it did shift. So it shifted from that kind of dry sensation with nothing on the toilet paper to a smooth sensation. And then you started to see something. So you started to see a little bit of dampness. You started seeing a little bit of shininess. So with this observational method, we would still consider those to be dry days, even though there was that smooth feeling. But basically because the dry days are like, there's either no mucus or mucus. So the dry days are no mucus days, and then the mucus days are obviously mucus. So Anyways, so we got that. So I would switch those to green.
Okay.
But when we had our session, so kind of back to what we're talking about, although you were at that stage of your cycle where it would have, seemed like you should have ovulated, the temperatures were not in the post-ovulatory range. And then you had gone back to dry. So you had like the dry and then some of the smooth stuff, but no mucus. And then you went back to dry. So what we see here, though, on day 30 and 31 is that you did have 2 days that you marked with a lubricative sensation. So on those days, you did have something you could pick up. You wrote down that it was clear, stretchy, and you saw it one time. So was it only the one time in that day that you saw?
So on the days that I finally saw like the fertile mucus, I actually didn't see it the very first time I tried to wipe because I was trying to use the front to back method, like from the back, and nothing came up. But then like when I went to wipe again, but from the front, and I looked at the tissue paper, that's when I saw the fertile mucus.
Okay.
For some reason. And then, so when I used on the very first day, I saw that twice, and it was kind of the egg white looking one, but kind of cloudy. And then the next day is when I saw like the very clear cervical mucus. And then, yeah, I only remember seeing that, once during that day.
Okay. And is that pretty typical? So in your cycle, then you had 2 days where you actually saw the clear stretchy, and it's quite obvious in the sense that you didn't have those observations on any other days. But on the other hand, it wasn't kind of like a large quantity per se. Is this pretty typical for you? I think I asked you this before. It sounds like previously you used to see more.
I mean, no, so it was quite a large amount. It's just that it didn't appear when I guess maybe the way things are oriented, it doesn't pick up when I reach from the back, but when I reach from the front and wipe, then yeah, there was a bunch that came out.
Okay. So it was a lot. It's just not a lot of times during the day.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then there's 2 temperatures on here. So the temp drop, is that the blue one?
Yes.
Okay. I always ask, and I think it always is the blue one. Just making myself some notes on your chart here so I don't have to keep asking you which is the temp drop. Okay. So I'm looking at your oral temps then, the red ones.
Yeah.
So I would draw the line just a little bit over the 97.7 mark, kind of just right over that higher temp there. You see what I mean? There's 2 temps that are right around 97.7.
Yeah, I think I did try to mark it. It's between 97.8 and 97.6.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
okay.
I'm basically drawing the line where you did maybe just slightly like over the dot, but it doesn't matter. You can draw it through the dot too. So same place basically. And then based on then what we're seeing here, ovulation likely happened on day 31 based on the temperature, because after day 31, we have the temps going up over the line and they stay there. Your luteal phase is 12 days, so that's good. Yeah, but your cycle is 43 days. So
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I've had long cycles for a really long time. So, or for as long as I can remember, I've had pretty long cycles. They're a little bit, their range is shorter. The length, the variance in length has shortened as I've gotten older. When I was younger, it used to go from between 30 to almost 50 days. But now it's between 35 and like 42. But yeah, that's been common for me. So that was one of my hesitations with using natural family planning, was my irregular cycle, being able to, identify ovulation. But, this experience so far, now that I have a job that kind of forces me to get up by a certain time, it's really helped with getting that consistent temperature reading at the same time every day. So previously, when I've tried the thermal method, I would often kind of skip it in the morning, but I've been better about it now. So when I saw the cervical mucus and then saw the temperature rise, I actually felt like I was getting it.
Okay. Well, so I think that because we still have a couple hot seats together, and you have another private session, I think we can take some time in those upcoming hot seat sessions to talk a little bit more about the length of your cycle. Have you ever looked into that? Like, have you ever Was that ever something that came up like with your doctor or anything, or was it just kind of like, okay, this is just how my cycles are?
Yeah, I would say it's more like that. This is just how my cycles are.
Okay. Well, so just to give some general, info, I mean, ideally cycles under 35 days, falling into that kind of 24 to 35 day range. So when they're consistently higher than that, there's typically something happening, especially with the history of it being quite a bit longer. And so it could be related to something like PCOS. So not to say that that's what you have, because we don't have enough information on this phone call right now to make that kind of decision. But just to kind of put it out there that it could be, I think of often these things as being on a spectrum. And so you might be on that spectrum. We would have to find out. So to get an actual diagnosis, we would want the doctor to test for androgens to see if your androgen levels are normal or if they're high. There might be other signs of that. If you've ever had unwanted coarse hair in places you didn't want, or cystic acne. So those can be signs of excess androgen, or even just the coarse hair. So I'm not sure if that's something you've experienced. If they were to do an ultrasound, they could see if there were multiple cysts on the ovaries. Typically, when we're looking at the criteria to see if that could be part of the, presentation of why your cycles are generally between 35 and 42 and used to be up to 50 and used to be really irregular. The Rotterdam criteria is looking for 2 of the 3. So 1 is the long irregular cycles, 2 is the high androgen levels, and 3 is the cysts on the ovaries. And so, I mean, that's something that we could talk about, and you could look into that and see if that applies. And it wouldn't, in your case, I think it would just clarify if that's what it is. And if that is what it is, then we could just work on some of the specific PCOS related factors like insulin resistance and stuff like that, and see if it helped to normalize your overall cycle length.
Okay.
So that's just the kind of overview, and I'll make a note and we'll go into that a little bit more in upcoming sessions. So to address your concern, because there's a lot of information out there that would say if your cycles are irregular, that you can't use fertility awareness. And I think that's typically based on the idea that fertility awareness is basically the rhythm method and that you need to have these predictable cycles in order for it to work, which isn't true. So we can certainly work with whatever the cycle is like, as long as we know the rules. We've been talking extensively about that in class. With that said, one of the challenges when you do have longer cycles is that, so if we look at this cycle right here, so, you have a long pre-ovulatory phase. So it's a lot of time to manage. So as we've talked about in class, the only time that pregnancy is possible in the cycle is in the pre-ovulatory phase. And so in your case, I think it could be considered a positive or a negative. You're not really showing a ton of mucus. For many women that have longer cycles, they often do have multiple patches of mucus or like more days of mucus. And that can be really challenging because you have to consider all those days fertile. So in your case, we would just have to work on some strategies to manage the pre-ovulatory phase. But for instance, when you're learning, one of my recommendations is, at least for the first several cycles, to not have any unprotected sex in the pre-ovulatory phase. And so with a pre-ovulatory phase that's lasting 30 days, that's a long time, So there are specific challenges that come up for women that have longer cycles. So overall, it would be good for us to see what we can do to identify maybe why the cycle's so long, so that while you're also learning to chart, we're also working on getting it down to under 35 days, which would be a bit easier for you to manage.
Okay. And I've already shared that with my fiance, the fact that right now the safest time for us is the post-op phase. So he understands and he's on board with it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so we'll definitely check in more about that. It's time, ladies. Time to take your fertility awareness knowledge and confidence to the next level. Just popping into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. My 10-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open, but only for a limited time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. And then on these days, so I wish you could see the chart, but basically all I did was I wrote in the cover line. I just kind of made some markings, but your peak day would be day 31 because that was the last day that you had the mucus. And that actually obviously matches up with the estimated ovulation day based on the temps. And again, I'm using the oral temps. So you'll see if you look at the temp drop temperatures, they're slightly different. So based on the temp drop, the first day that the temp was a little higher, it would depend on how you looked at it, either day 31 or day 33. So, but when there's both, I tend to go with the oral temp just because I have a lot more years of experience interpreting oral temps. Anyways, so the peak day would be day 31. So if we mark that, you can go into your app and mark that as peak on day 31.
Okay.
You can just, you just put that in. And then, so that day would be considered fertile, obviously the days of mucus plus the 3 days after. So that would be day 32, 33, and 34. And so based on mucus, the first post-ovulatory infertile day available for sex would be day 35.
Okay.
And then based on temperature, going with the oral temps again. So day 32 was the first day of the rise. So we're doing the count through temperatures here. So the first day based on temperatures would be the evening of day 34. So the later of the two is day 35. So basically that would be day 35 in this particular cycle based on the cross-check of mucus and temps would be the first post-ovulatory infertile day.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you've just started your next cycle. So just to get a sense of it, so from your experience then, like a 43-day cycle from let's say within the last year, is that just pretty typical? Is that a bit longer, shorter, average?
I would say that that's average.
Okay. And then sometimes it's a little shorter.
Sometimes it's gone as low as 33. I think that's the shortest I've seen it go in the last couple of years. It's usually in the high 30s, low 40s.
Okay. And then have you noticed anything different over the years? Has there ever been a thing that you're like, oh, when I do this, it's shorter? Or has it always felt kind of random?
So I'm an attorney for a pretty big company. And then I was in law school before that. So just the nature of my work, I never really got a chance to pause and think about something that I might have done to affect it. I guess I've always assumed that because of the nature of my job, the level of stress I have, and then, finishing law school and getting my law license, I just assumed that it was that stress played a significant role in my cycle length.
Well, and I'm sure it does to some extent. Maybe give me a snapshot. It's funny, I'm thinking of a past client that I had, and she was so sweet, and she was a law student also. And I remember we had to work around it because there's no way around, like when you're a student, and especially in law school or any other really demanding professional program, there's a lot of things that need to happen. There's less sleep that happens. There's so much work. There's a lot of responsibility. So you can't really maximize those lifestyle factors, in the midst of it. You just kind of work around it and see what you can do. So just give us like a snapshot into what it looks like, in terms of, are you able to sleep? Do you have lots of late nights? Like when exams come around, that kind of thing. In terms of the stress, like, is it related to the workload? Is it just give us a little window as to how the school affects your ability to get good sleep, get exercise when you want, eat, eat what you would like to be eating, whatever. Like, let us know how the experience is kind of hindering some of those lifestyle factors.
Well, so I've also recently changed jobs, and in my new job, the hours are not as long as they were in my previous position. In my previous position, I would have some overnight shifts. I would have to, separately from being an attorney, I would have to work overnight for a separate thing that my company does to kind of monitor things. And then, so I'm just sleeping in a cot in my office and then going to work at 8 a.m. and then sometimes staying until 8 p.m. That's not uncommon. And then, I go home and then I have to take care of my dogs and, try to spend some time with my fiance before going to bed. And some days I will literally eat and then go straight to sleep. And then some days, I do want to socialize. So then I'll get 3 or 4 hours of sleep before having to get up again. But in my current job, because, I understand that you have to sleep for at least 5 hours to get basal body temperature, I make sure I get a minimum of 5 hours of sleep and make adjustments based on getting at least 5 hours of sleep. And then the one thing I will say that about, improving cycle length, I think that when I was able to eat 3 meals a day and then get a decent amount of sleep, I see the cervical mucus appear, at least, because there was one cycle during our session, or one cycle before I started taking this class, where I didn't really see the cervical mucus like I normally do, and that was a little bit concerning. And during that time period, definitely not sleeping a lot and definitely not eating 3 meals a day. And I know that some people, when they don't eat, they tend to overeat. That's not true in my case. I can skip a meal in the normal breakfast and lunch hours, have my first meal at about 3 p.m. and still eat the same amount of food, and then maybe eat dinner at 7 p.m. and not overeat. So I know it's an issue for some people. It hasn't been for me, but yeah, when I'm eating 3 meals a day, which didn't happen very often in my previous job, but happens more often now, I'm having a better cycle length. Like the last couple of weeks, I'm also trying to, I'm a little bit overweight, so I'm trying to get in better shape. So my trainer was saying, you really have to eat breakfast, and you really need to eat a minimum amount of protein, which you've mentioned in our sessions, that if I'm not eating enough protein, that's also going to affect my cycle health. And I never thought about that before.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, no, thanks for giving us a bit of a window in there. And again, just to acknowledge that when I think about life, it sounds so vague, but when I think about life and how the cycle fits into it, if you think about, let's say, like a couple decades of your life, like your 20s or your 30s, there's going to be periods of time or phases in there where, depending on the job, the educational commitments, your family commitments, relationship, etc., there's going to be phases in there where you just can't hit that optimal kind of thing that we're aiming for, right? In terms of like 3 meals a day, lots of sleep, whatever. So I feel like it's important to acknowledge that, but always to work around it. And so I think it just so happened that your job, the switch in positions, is probably going to help you to implement a lot of the things that we're talking about in class. And then we'll be able to see for ourselves if it makes a difference in your cycle and how much. So I think we have a few great things to talk about in our upcoming hot seat sessions. I have a few ideas and suggestions for you so we can see. And basically, the great thing about using the menstrual cycle as a vital sign is that we get that feedback. So if we do make some changes and do our best within the confines of what's happening right now in your life, I mean, you've got a wedding coming up, and I'm sure as much as it's a happy event, it's always, stressful to some degree. But yeah, so that's actually really helpful to get a sense of what was happening in your life. And just to comment on that, because you mentioned that when you skip meals, some people would then overeat later because they're so hungry. And it's interesting because there's definitely truth to that for a lot of people. I often see the opposite, which is that even if you try to eat a lot more, like a bigger meal or whatever, the second meal or whatever, that you end up eating less. So I think for a lot of women, you would think that, okay, well, because I skipped lunch, my dinner's going to be bigger, which is true. Like it might be for some people. Often you're not getting as much as you would have if you ate 3 meals. So I think there's different ways. And then for others, they may skip that meal, but then at night eat like 3 bowls of ice cream. I say that because I really love ice cream. But just to put it out there, because there's different ways that it can play out. But either way, as we wrap up today, I mean, so I think what we covered a bit of the charting specifics, went over some of the notations, analyzed your chart, so we have a better sense of what the cycle looks like. And this full chart that we have here from May to June is the first full chart in the class. Obviously, it took a bit longer because of the delayed ovulation, but I feel like this really helps me to get that kind of baseline chart in so that I see what we're working with. And this will be really helpful in strategizing for using the method for birth control, as well as strategizing for health-wise to see if we can tighten up the cycle and get ovulation happening a bit sooner.
Okay.
So any last questions for me?
No. I'm glad we were able to have this session. Thank you.
You're welcome. Me too. Well, so for someone who's listening and they're thinking about using fertility awareness, I mean, in your case, you didn't come off of contraceptives. You just hadn't used them. And this was the way that you wanted to manage your fertility. So, for someone who is using birth control and is absolutely terrified to, rely on this, what, if anything, would you want her to know?
I would say that going from using medication or a medical device to control your fertility, changing to something natural is definitely scary just because you're relying on yourself. But as you learn this method, you learn that your body tells you exactly when you're fertile. So if you are open to it and you don't want to have to deal with a medical device or having to remember to take a pill, just be willing to try it out and be patient with yourself as you learn to read your body. Because besides birth control, there's just the allowing your body to operate the way it should and let your body tell you when something's wrong. Because as you wrote in the fifth vital sign, your menstrual cycle can tell you so much about your health besides when you can create a baby or not. There's other health factors that become open to you there's other factors you can learn about yourself that become open to you when you aren't taking medications or using medical devices. So for me, when I was looking at what I wanted to do, it was very clear to me. And as I'm slowly learning through the course, I'm starting to gain confidence in my ability to listen to what my body's telling me.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it's really interesting when you start charting, because one of the great things about having not been on contraceptives is that you've been contending with your cycle for all these years. So you do have a sense of what's typical for you, what's normal for you. I think one of the challenges is I was similar to you when I was in my 20s, because when I started charting, my cycles were also an average of about 38 days. So I did have that typical very long cycle, and my ovulation typically was around day 30. And I think one of the great things about just cycling and living your life is that you get a sense of like, this is normal for me or whatever, but it can backfire when what you're experiencing isn't normal, but you're kind of just like, this is normal. This is just how I am. So hopefully we can kind of hold both of those realities and like shift it a little bit. Cause I know for me, it was really kind of like profound when I learned that, wait a minute, 38 days isn't normal. I thought I just had long cycles, right? But at the same time, because you have that history, when you start charting, you start to actually see and pay attention to like, oh, I did this. I've been doing this for a couple months and look at how my cycle's changed. It really does give you an opportunity to delve deeper into what you kind of already intuitively know about your body. It gives you a little bit more data, which is really cool. And for someone who is on the fence about the class, so they've been kind of like lurking, listening to tons of podcast episodes and thinking about jumping into the group program, maybe share a little bit about what your experience has been so far and what you'd want her to know.
So learning fertility awareness there's a lot of information to get through. And I just remember feeling overwhelmed. And so I just really appreciate the class for breaking it down into smaller steps. And then besides breaking down learning into smaller steps, it allows you to slowly build the habit. So, every week when you have class, you're kind of reminded, have I been charting? Am I prepared to show Lisa a chart so she can help me, see what things I do understand and what things I don't understand, which was different from the Billings method person I had, where it was, she showed me how to chart and she said, come back in a month. And then me with my job, I didn't have this external thing that was reminding me to do it. And so I didn't chart. Whereas with this, it's, every week I get that reminder. And then, just being in a group with other women who are also learning, we all have different goals. Not all of us are trying to use it for birth control. We have people who are trying to conceive. And then just kind of, besides learning from Lisa, you kind of get to hear perspectives from people who are in a different fertility goal than you are. And you can kind of remember that for when you are in the same boat as them. But yeah, overall, so glad that I signed up for the course, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more.
Well, thank you. I love that. And that's one of my favorite parts about doing the group program, because in the back end, what all the podcast listeners don't see is that day in and day out, I spend most of my actual time working with women and having these kinds of conversations like the one we're having now. And so I just love that the podcast allows me to showcase that a little bit. But the group program really allows you to kind of hear those experiences one-on-one. And especially because I'm guessing, Maria, that all of your friends aren't totally into fertility awareness, right? So yeah. It's also, even if you have a couple that are really interested, it's kind of a rare opportunity to be able to just kind of immerse yourself into it. So I'm really glad that you were able to jump into this round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. And I'm also glad to hear that although this is your second time reaching out for support and education and learning around fertility awareness, that you feel more confident and comfortable this time. So thanks so much. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/432. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Maria. I always love doing these episodes with clients and showcasing what the process of learning fertility awareness is really like. And one of the pieces of feedback that I get all the time from clients in my programs is how much they really appreciate these episodes. It really does give you a window into this topic. I mean, this is something I talk about day in and day out. I'm always behind the scenes working with clients in my various programs. But, you know, for the average person, these are not conversations that you're having on a regular basis. So I feel like they demystify the process. Hopefully they empower you and encourage you to know that this is a real thing. People really do it. They are able to do it successfully. And in my opinion and experience, the best case scenario is when you are able to take the time to learn about it, to take a period of devoted time to learn to chart and to have the support you need to get your questions answered at the earlier stages of learning so that you can confidently move past it. Like any new skill, there's tons of kind of unexpected situations, specific to you, unique to you scenarios that come up. And these are all questions with answers. That's the way I'm looking at it. Because in our program, I think the majority of the time, what I'm doing is answering questions about charts, about the cycle. You know, what happens if I see this? Oh, I didn't think I was going to see this on this day. I am not supposed to see mucus on this day. What do I do about it? What does it mean? And so this is really what the process is in the Fertility Awareness Mastery Live program. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Maria. And if you would like to go through the FAM Live program yourself, there's still a few weeks to jump into Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. We're starting in October of 2022 if you are wanting to go through this process yourself. For details, head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM. That's FAM. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into this show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.